most families are dysfunctional. So how are we going to identify how that dysfunction has brought us into adulthood, and now we potentially are being dysfunctional in our own family now?
Welcome to the podcast where mental health is at the core of what we focus on. We strive to develop people like you to maximize who you are and what you've been called to do by sharing tools and resources for better brain health. And now here's your host, Juan Garcia.
Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. We are starting a new series and it's focused on family of origin issues. Now, if you have a family or you were brought up in a family, you know that we all potentially have had issues and issues of dysfunction. I know I'll speak for myself. So I am a middle child. I have an older brother and a younger sister, and we were definitely dysfunctional. Now, I know you're probably saying, man, what if, his siblings listen or watch to this episode? It's fine. They know it's true. We all agree there was a lot of dysfunction in our home. Now, I will preface to say that we are a large family in terms of aunts, uncles, cousins. My mom was one of 16, and my dad is one of 6. And we have other family members from my paternal grandfather's second marriage. And so there's a ton of us. And obviously, when you have imperfect people, you will have dysfunction to some degree. Now, part of the dysfunction, what happens is that we develop what's called codependency. And the nature of codependency basically is that we have love tanks, and those love tanks are not filled in a balanced way. And all of that has to do with the way we were brought up. A lot of our parents, a lot of the people that raised us, grandparents, guardians, what have you, they have the best intentions, I believe, to raise us up the best way possible. Keep in mind, when you don't know better, you can't do better. When you know better, you do better. So a lot of our parents, a lot of the guardians, the adults that tried to do the best they could with us, that's all they could do. They did the best they could do because the people that raised them also did the best they could do. And so I want to make sure that we preface this series by saying this is not an attack on the people that raised us. This is not an attack on the people that probably caused the dysfunction in our lives. This is not for us to withhold resentment and all of these emotions that are not going to help us at this point. This is just to identify potential dysfunctions when we were growing up, and as it relates to how we're potentially bringing those dysfunctions into our family now, relationships that we develop. It affects the way we work, we handle other people. Now, if you have not been able to watch or listen to our other episodes, we talked about temperaments and the importance of knowing our temperament. And when we know our temperament, we also get a little glimpse as to how other people are wired. And that's important because sometimes we struggle in relationships with people because not only do we not really understand how we're wired, we don't understand potentially how other people are wired. And so that gives us a lack of understanding, a lack of empathy. We get short with people. We want to fight all the time. We want to get our point across. We want to prove that we're right, etc. And so all of this creates chaos in our lives, stress, anxiety, and all of these other mental health issues that then we have to deal with. So the reason why I want to bring this series is because I believe that when we understand our family of origin issues, when we understand what it is that we were indirectly taught, and we kind of came up with this understanding of self, this understanding of others, and probably wasn't the healthiest, this is why we make the decisions that we make today. So when we talk about family origin issues, we are talking about the dysfunction that we were exposed to as a result of our family of origin. Now, the ideal healthy family unit is where you have two parents that love each other, they choose to love each other, and they are sacrificial in nature towards each other. Then when they have children, they care for themselves still first, and then out of the overflow of that caring for each other, now they care for their children. A lot of times in families, we go into certain decision making in a dysfunctional way because perhaps, let's just say a couple, they get married, but they have their own, issues, right? Now, obviously, we bring these issues to marriage, we bring these issues to partnership, and sometimes we don't necessarily address some of the issues that we deal with, and so we make decisions based on the lack of certain needs not being met. And one of those needs that I have seen time and time again is that need of acceptance, of affirmation, of belonging, this need to be loved in a way where it's shown, it's evident. And so this example, let's say of a couple that gets married, then they have their first child. And one of the parents, or let's say both parents, they put so much love into this child because they probably didn't have that experience growing up, that they, in a sense, abandoned their love for each other. Or if it's one parent that's putting a lot of love for this child, neglecting the love that they should be expressing continuously to their spouse, we see that issue, it becomes a cycle, because what happens is, and this usually is found in moms, but it can be true for dads as well. What happens is that the affirmation, the acceptance that a lot of us did not receive growing up, now we receive it in our minds, we receive it from this child, because children are defenseless, they don't know better, they gravitate to us as parents. They gravitate to that person that's taking care of them. And there's a bond, there's a connection, especially with moms. There's a deep connection and a deep bond. And so what they lacked when they were children, not that they have their own child, they're thinking that they're going to get it from this child, and they abandon their original relationship with their spouse. And that's where some of the dysfunction starts to be seen. That doesn't mean that that's all of the introduction of dysfunction in families, but it is one example that I just want to bring about so that you understand where I'm trying to go with this series. Another one is where we try to project how we feel on our children based on the fact that we have issues communicating with our spouse. I'll give you an example. Let's say you and your spouse have a disagreement, you can't get to clear communication, there's no clarity, and so you have children, and now you start to use your children indirectly to communicate to the spouse, or you use your children as messengers to communicate to your spouse. This term is called triangulation, where you're trying to enmesh, you're trying to get your children involved in something that you should be dealing with personally with your spouse. So that's another example. There's so many examples that we see, especially when it comes to counseling. We see a lot of family dynamics, and a lot of this is because of issues that we did not deal with in a healthy way when we were growing up, because this is what we learned, right? This is how we were raised. Our parents didn't know better. This is what they taught us indirectly, sometimes directly. And so what I want to do with this series is I want to bring some awareness as to why we sometimes have difficulty with some of the areas in our lives, especially in relationship, because of our issues from the family of origin. I know for me, I dealt with, and I still do to some degree, I dealt with rejection. I didn't know how to handle rejection. I was the middle child, and obviously you can't compete with the oldest, you can't compete with the youngest, who's a girl, the only girl. And so now the oldest is king of the castle. The youngest, that happens to be the girl of the home, is the princess, the baby. So parents don't do this intentionally. They just gravitate to the reality that, this one stands out more than the other. And so what happens is you kind of get lost in your identity and who you are. And so you try to perform, you try to do things so you can stand out. And a lot of that performance is not always good or positive. Sometimes it's troublemaking. Sometimes it's getting into trouble. So a lot of the dysfunctions that we deal with in terms of our interactions with people today as adults in the workplace, etc., has a lot to do with the family of origin issues that we did not deal with. So what we're going to do for the next couple of months, we're going to dive into the different dysfunctional rules in families. There are quite a few, and we're going to really dive into each of them each week as we progress into this series. So I want you to stay tuned. If you have not subscribed, this is the first time you're listening to us, please subscribe, hit that notification bell, because you do want to get notified when we launch our next episode when it comes to this specific topic. And if you have not been able to participate in our episodes prior to this one, you can go ahead and look at our playlist. We have different categories. We talked about temperaments. We talked about false beliefs. We've talked about quite a few topics that I think would be of interest to you. So make sure that you do so. And also like this video, comment, let us know if you can relate to some of these issues that we're going to discuss and the dysfunctions that we're discussing. Let us know if it's something that you can relate to, and also share with your family members, especially if you can relate to some of the dysfunctions. You're like, remember this? Remember when this happened when we were little? What we want to do is we want to create awareness to some of these dysfunctions. We don't want to go to a dark place with this, and we don't want to make it too light, because we understand that a lot of us probably are still dealing with the ramifications of dysfunction in our families. But what we want to do ultimately is create awareness, create understanding of how this affects us, and then also create some potential tools and resolutions to how we can best move forward in a healthy way, so that our family and the next generation can kind of get really good tools to handle family dynamics. Because as long as there's people in this world, there's going to be issues, there's going to be dysfunction, there's going to be some level of insecurity and issues with self-value and self-worth and so forth. So we want to make sure that we give you the tools that you need moving forward. So family of origin issues. I wanted to read some notes that I wrote down, because I think that we can all learn from going back and reflecting as to what potentially brought about some of these issues. There's a book by Scott Peck, and it's called The Road Less Traveled. It's a really good book, and he outlines some of the techniques that I want to share with you that kind of deal with the genesis, if you will, of some of these dysfunctions. And there's 4 things that he outlines. And the first one is delaying gratification, right? Sometimes in our family dynamic unit, we are told, no, you can't have that. No, you can't have that. Or we go into a store. I remember we would go to stores, and obviously now as an adult, I can understand some of the challenges that my parents had to deal with financially. But we would go to a store, and my mom would tell us, make sure you don't touch anything, you don't look at anything, we can't afford anything, so don't even think about it. And obviously, this would all be in Spanish with the nice Latino feel to it. Kind of what's the term I'm trying to think about? It's that aggressive, passive aggressive, threatening. You know better, right? So we would just enjoy each other's company, enjoy the fact that we're out together. but we knew that we were limited. So that's the delaying gratification. We're going to go and see some stuff, but you're not going to have it. You can't have it. The second thing is that Scott Peck mentions is accepting responsibility for self. Accepting responsibility for self. Holding each other accountable. Making sure that we're understanding that this is your responsibility. This is your decision that you have to make. And then you have to live with the consequences of that choice. The third thing that Scott Peck shares is telling the truth and being dedicated to reality. Focusing and committing to truth telling so that we understand that we're creating a reality that has to do with truth, honesty, which builds integrity. So when that is lacking in a family unit, there's a lot of dysfunction to that. And then fourthly is bracketing ego needs for the sake of growth and development. So there's times where we have to put ourselves aside and things that we desire or we want so that we can understand and take advantage of an opportunity as a learned opportunity so that we can see how we can benefit from this and grow. An example of this is, obviously when I was growing up in the car, we had a car, it didn't have seatbelts, it was an older car, so don't even try to guess my age. But we were able to understand that there were still a safety concern. And so our dad would tell us, make sure you sit back, no fooling around. My brother and I, we were always together. No, play fighting, because he knew that as we're in the car, even though we can't be belted in because there's no seatbelt, but that we can, move around and be at higher risk of hurting ourselves. And so just an example of just putting our own needs of that desire of playing and play fighting and horse playing, as they call it, but putting that aside because we knew that safety was an important thing for us to learn. And so that allowed us to develop this understanding that we can grow in areas where we put ourselves secondary, so that we can receive information that will help us with safety, with growth, with development, etc. That's just a glimpse of some of the things that I want to share with you throughout this series. What we're going to do is we're going to dive into 9 dysfunctional rules that family of origins basically had. And so if you had any type of dysfunction in your family, you're going to be able to connect with some, if not all, of these 9 rules that we're going to share and dive into every week for the next couple of months. Every rule stands alone. And so we want to dive into it. We want to talk about the nature of it. We want to talk about how it affects us till this day. We want to talk about what that mindset does for us in terms of healthy growth and development, healthy view, worldview, healthy view of self. All of those things, I want you to join me on this journey to discover why is it that this family of origin issue arose in terms of these dysfunctional rules that we abided by, which created a sense of codependency for us to live forward, which today potentially is affecting our mental health. And how can we learn from it so that we don't bring that dysfunction to our families and the next generation to come? So I hope you will stay tuned. I know we said a lot, but the beauty of this is that you can go back, you can listen again, take some notes, share with us your insights, share with us your concerns, your comments, all of that we would love to hear. And we are going to share forward all of this information free for you so that you can be empowered and encouraged as it relates to your mental health and your family of origin. So for now, we are done with this episode, but we will see you on the next one.
Thank you for tuning into our podcast. For more information, visit our website at juangarciaenterprises.com. Our host, Juan Garcia, is available for speaking, coaching, and one-on-one counseling. You can email us at info@juangarciaenterprises.com. Until next time, remember, we only have one mind, so mind yours.